I just saw how much we lost a lot of produce, or that's not the way, livestock in Texas.
We lost livestock.
An insane amount.
We lost produce because people don't realize citrus grown in Red River Valley of Texas, and not just Texas. If you go across the South, you've got different crops. The fullness of what we lost down there will not be known for a number of months, not to mention industrial output, all sorts of things. The dominoes fall. Now,
the chips for the
but that's a different animal that wasn't necessarily Texas-based, but we'll talk about that at a different time.
Cool.
Texas. The residents of the Lone Star State have had a rough patch as of late. While the power is back on in most of the state, the damage from the closed snap will continue to wreak havoc for some time. And now, while there's plenty of finger-pointing and instant experts on the subject of what went wrong with the availability of electric power, I want to share with you some of the myths floating about that have been debunked by industry experts. Full disclosure, I read a lot of industry-specific information that I share with you, our listeners, every week. What I'm about to share with you comes from a electric utility magazine, T&D World, short for Transmission and Distribution. I mean, and this is an industry. This is not something you can go and just get. And I want to talk about what they were talking about. So that, I'm not armchair quarterbacking this, but I want to. It was necessary. I thought last week was enough. Found out that it wasn't. So we're going to deal with this one last time.
Let's get to it.
All right. Now, let me and I'm sure I'm not going to get to all of it.
Yep.
So I'll just try to get as far as I can. Starting, power conservation is not a partisan issue. When supplies are tight because of a freezing winter storm, a heat wave, or a natural disaster, it's just a good idea not to overload the grid during these times. Yeah, I'm going to let that just settle because that's not Democrat or Republican. If there's too much strain on the grid, it creates an unbalanced condition and an uncontrolled power outage could result. Electricity doesn't care who you voted for. It simply follows the laws of physics.
And like we're just talking about, they're pure supply and demand because of the unregulation. They don't keep reserves.
No, they don't pay.
Texas does not keep reserves.
Let me throw this at you that blew my mind. The average utility in the United States owns its power generation facilities and most of its transmission lines. Do you know in Texas they don't? That the power generators and the utilities are separate companies, which means if you are a power generator in Texas, not beholden to a specific utility, you make money when people buy your electricity. You are incentivized to generate electricity when demand is high and turn the thing off when demand is low. Why does that matter? Tell you why. In the rest of the United States, the utilities that own their own power generation facilities do something what they call hot standby. What does that mean? It means they have facilities that are offline spinning that can be brought online when you have tremendous demand or natural disasters or something. They can bring this online, and it's part of what you call your rate base. You are paying for what they call hot standby. That means that usually you don't see a lot of power interruptions in the rest of the country. I mean, here in Iowa, we just came through an extremely nasty, bitterly cold snap. Guess what? You remember some weeks ago I told you that the utility that provides power here produces over 50%, almost 100% of their power from renewable energy, wind turbines. You know, the ones you all claim froze in Texas? Well, they didn't freeze in Iowa. Why? We got heaters.
And shout out to El Paso, too, who's not on Texas grid. Did you read about that at all?
I didn't know that.
They're not on Texas grid. And they tried to explain to you, El Paso's not close. You know,
no.
When you think of
nothing's close.
They're in Texas, but everything is, it's
east and south.
Yeah. They're on the Western grid. They only like 5% of their people had any issues with power at all. My friend Jeremy, shout out, he brought that up to me, and I'm like, oh my God, how can we not bring up El Paso? Yeah. Congrats, El Paso.
Yeah.
Way to pick a stand.
Here's the thing. The regulation is capitalism, pure and simple. That's great. Problem is that It incentivizes things that sometimes should not be incentivized, and not being prepared and not spending the money to be prepared is an issue. In fairness, Texas grid was optimized for 110, 150 degrees in the middle of the summertime when air conditioning demand is high.
This was freak weather by any standard. Everyone agrees on that.
Well, to a degree. Remember, 3 years ago, Houston, Texas.
And like 8 years ago, too.
40 inches of rain. Climate change is real, people. And these utilities got to make some decisions about this weather. It's going to be more extreme weather more often, which means they're going to have to spend
weatherize. Money. You got to weatherize.
Yeah,
that's
you do.
The biggest thing to come out I read out of this.
Now, here's the thing. Texas has run its own power grid since 1970. Let that sink in. They're not connected to the national grid, meaning even if there was power available, Texas couldn't get it because the minute you cross state lines, you become subject to federal rules and regulations. Texas, by being totally in state, could do their own thing, which worked well for a while, but doesn't always work well when there's a crisis. And that's what's going on. So there's some things. Also, let me quote this, because this is important. It wasn't just renewables, which were all over the place, and only about 5% of the load.
I was going to say, hardly any of it was renewables.
The fact is, and remember, this is coming from the industry, not some armchair quarterback. Fact is, just about every way we have making and distributing electricity performs worse under sub-zero conditions experienced when we are not prepared for them, and that's what happened to the middle of the country this week. Thermal power plants, whether they use coal, natural gas, or nuclear to spin their turbines, guess what? All have to use water. Pump through the pipes to run their condensers and control their internal temperatures. If the plants aren't insulated against low temperatures, they become less safe to operate and sometimes must shut down, meaning people, water freezes. Period. Full stop.
Most of the lost generation was natural gas and coal.
Yeah. Hello? They couldn't get it from the wells because, you know what? There's moisture in natural gas. The moisture froze. It caused problems trying to transport it, to get it to the plants and get these plants to run. So here's the problem. Maximum demand, minimum power generation. And we didn't even start talking about cascading power failures. That's something totally different.